Welcome to Dusty Little Wastelanders, written by L.L. Smith, narrated by L.L. Smith. Chapter 12, Dustnado. There was a roaring in the sky. It aimed to keep me from my rest. The distant rumbles raised my eyes on multiple occasions. The night was long, and these constant interruptions helped to drag it out. The bellowing growls rose in volume, but I continued to dismiss them and pass back out. My mind knew better. It remembered this sound from the past. My rest depleted to the point of laying on the ground with my eyes closed, a distant clattering losing its subtlety by the second. My mind wouldn't allow me to ignore this roaring. I pulled myself free of my sleeping bag, paying close attention not to wake Donald. I sat up and turned to the window. They'd put drapes over the window. When did that happen? They must have been tired of my obsession with the view. I rose to my feet and tiptoed over to Donald just as the roaring approached its crescendo. My heart was beating in time with the pounding against the distant shanties. The sky roaring, the debris clattering against the shanties, and the uncanny darkness. My throat dried and my palms slimed. My heart became a hammer in my chest. Despite my denials, my mind and heart knew what was coming. It can't be, I refuted the evidence. They don't hit this far south. Another denial rattled through my mind. When I was close enough to pull the drape, the window shattered and I was blown to the ground by a gust of dusty wind. My skin burned as the dust poured into my serrated skin. Basic Dustnado safety: steer clear of windows. The simple rule crashed into my mind when my body hit the floor. I laid there a moment, cringing and leaking. I flopped onto my back. The shattered window regurgitated a black cloud of dust. The eye was coming. I was watching the dusty call before the blowdown. My palm slapped over my mouth. I needed to prevent further consumption. The blood on my lips gave my tongue a new sensation. It oozed from my glass-ridden hand. I turned over and climbed onto the bed. Tim had somehow slept through the commotion. My weight laid on top of him, and I forced the covers onto his face. That woke him up. Awake and scared, he fought against my hands like a rabid badger. We wrestled on the bed while I attempted to assert my dominance with only one hand. The other was still covering my mouth. I leaned in close to his ear so he could hear, withstanding the clubs to the head he sent my way. "Stay under as many layers of covers as you can," I shouted over the gust in Dustnado that looked to blacken Hillville. "If you hear me and understand, then give me a good punch," I instructed. I felt that one in the rib. "Good, now do as I've said and stay put and I'll be back for you." I rolled off the bed and stuck to the floor. The sky was clouded with dust. Dust that had pooled the floor once we were free of the eye's view. I crawled to Donald, who was awake but disoriented. There was another crack at the wall, and the nearby shanty was sent through our bedroom. It crashed right through the wall, lacking any sort of invite. It smacked against the opposite wall, rocking the entire structure with it. This misplaced debris flew back towards us. I leapt into Donald to keep us both low to the floor. The shanty wall bounced out the way it came, taking a bigger chunk of our bedroom wall along with it. "Cover your mouth," I instructed. "Don't breathe the dust." Donald followed my instructions. As I crawled to the other side of the room, the wind blew over pictures, blew in all sorts of malice and muffled my ears. The gaping hole in our room provided the dust a larger entry by which to inundate us. I reached the dresser on the opposite wall, its top half reduced to wood chips by the flying shanty wall. The valuable drawer remained whole. Miss Nature had tried to take me out, but botched it. I pulled the bottom drawer out of the dresser and retrieved my only outfit I ever kept in it, my dust suit. As a Stone-Tooth native, my dust suit was like a second pair of pajamas. Stone-Tooth had more Dustnados than it had citizens. I stuck to the ground and squeezed into my dust suit. My limbs squeezed into the thick red wool full-body suit, complete with feeties and hand coverings. Once I was in it nice and snug, I flipped up the hood. The suit was snugger than I recalled, must have been putting on the pounds. It had also been several years since the suit's last ride. I reached back into the drawer and retrieved my bandana and goggles, the goggles thrown over my eyes and the bandana over my mouth. It was time to face the storm. My coverings were adequate. Protocol suggested we wear our dust suits under more regular clothes. Given the fact that this Dustnado hit while I was practically in my birthday suit, I didn't have time to fully get dressed. Sticks and other people's property were flung into the room and smacked against the wall. The barrage persisted, and then it stopped. The incoming danger had ceased, and I sprang into action. More incoming dust clouds about floored me again. The wind steered my legs and couldn't wait to buck me off. Ride the wind, I remembered. 5 years had passed since my last Dustnado. It was the year we left Stone-Tooth, but these principles stuck in my brain. My body coasted with the drafts from the window and gashed the wall. I let them guide me to the door. More debris flew in from the streets, rocks this time. They pelted my cut-up body like some cruel punishment. My body lunged into the door, falling from pain and imbalance. My hands caught the doorknob on the way down and gave it a life grip. I used the knob as leverage and pulled myself vertical again. Once I steadied my stance, it was time to leave. "Things are going to get worse once I open this door," I called out to Donald and TM. "Stay low and keep your mouth covered until I get you." My grip tugged at the knob several times, but the wind was blowing the door shut. I waited for the draft to change. The vacuum current aimed to suck me right in. Another yank on the knob. The door blew open, and the downstairs gust blew me right over. I crashed to the ground, windless. My head spanked the wood floor. The foul landing wasn't the end. The wind proceeded to blow me across the floor and spine first into my dresser. It toppled over upon collision and split what was left of it. My body stilled, disoriented and breathless. The room's roof was a black, thick cloud. The dust hadn't dropped yet. We were still in the eye. I climbed back to my feet, using the bed and nightstand as leverage. The struggle against the wind's current began again. It was time to find the current and ride with its flow, steering my feet wherever it blew me. Once I was in flow, I followed it out the room and over to the neighboring room. My hand snagged a hold of the neighboring doorknob, my feet still steadied. My fist bashed the door. My hands screamed as I splattered blood all over the door and jammed glass further into my flesh. K2! I called out. No response. My foot flung into the door with the force of 50 men. The door blew open and my body sucked into the room by the current. My stomach hit the floor and my face cracked against the ground. My hands scrambled the dusty planks. The room was covered in a sheet of dust. Its black waves swept in from the blown-out windows. The wind currents had shifted in this room. The dust followed gravity to the ground rather than being stuck lifted in the air. I looked over to K2's bed. There was a thick blanket of dust covering it. The silhouette of a human amid the dust covering was barely recognizable. I rolled onto my back. All this falling had to stop. No matter where I lay, my body beat with discomfort. The current aimed to press me to the floor, once again using the bedding as a nightstand. I pulled myself upright. My body kept low and shuffled over to K2's bed. Acting against the current was like wrestling a bull. My back was just waiting to pound against the floor again, but I needed to save K2. My fist snagged a corner of K2's sheet. They jerked. Dust blew into the air. K2 was revealed. The fact that he slept on his stomach may have just saved his life. Either way, he was unconscious now and needed to be brought downstairs. My body lowered once more, avoiding the launching dust and debris. I removed my bandana and rose to tie it around K2's mouth. He was protected from dust consumption. It was time to get him out of here. I moved his arms over my shoulders and popped a squat, and jockeyed him up my back until he was riding piggyback. Once he was stable, we waited for the right flow. We flowed right on out the door. My mouth was clamped shut and the only air passed right through my nostrils. We came to the stairs and my eyes refused to look down. I'd done this a time or two, but usually with a child on my back. The stairs happened one at a time, each step very unsteady, but K2 needed to arrive to safety, which was the lowest point of the building. Another trusty stone-tooth teaching: keep low and stay under the dust. A dust-suited man met us at the bottom of the stairs, Esther if I had to guess. He helped hoist K2 off my shoulders, and we shared the load as we finished out the stairs and took him over to the room behind the bar. The room was shut off from any doors and windows and was mostly safe from the wind and dust clouds. We cleared any debris that could potentially knock into K2 and laid him down. "Is he?" Esther asked. "Just unconscious. He was sleeping on his stomach," I confirmed. "We'll have to see how he fares when he wakes." It's great that you were up here, Enry. You saved his life," Esther congratulated me. "Don't you have any boards?" I asked. "We need to get these windows and doors boarded up and try and keep the dust out." "They're in the shed out back," Esther instructed. "Out back?" I glared. "Never keep your boards outside. Not only is it too dangerous to go out there, but they've probably been blown away by the storm." "I didn't think we'd need them," Esther defended. "Dustnado's never happened in Killville." Esther's voice shivered. "Well, today they do," I confirmed. "Go and get TM and Donald from the room. They're both awake and can walk, but aren't used to Dustnados. They just need to be guided safely down here." I turned to gather tools. "Enry!" Esther called out to me. I turned back over to him, trying to address his concern. I don't do real well with Dustnados." He shifted in his stance. "You've done fine so far," I asserted. That seemed to be enough to knock the man back into his gear as he took off from the stairs. There was a hammer and a handful of nails nearby. I snagged a rag and tied it around my mouth and nose to make a makeshift bandana. My legs aimed for the heart of the bar with my tools in hand. The dust poured in through the multiple openings in the front of the bar. This place had far too many windows. I turned to the back exit. It had been blown out completely, and the shed along with it. Destruction cluttered that exit beyond traversing. I turned to the front of the room and watched the dust blow in and pile up on the floor. The heart of the Hey there, what's up? LL Smith here. Thank you so much for enjoying my audiobook. I'm going to interrupt you real quick and say, if you get real anxious to hear what happens next and just can't wait till next week, or if you get the urge to just support such a stunning, ruggedly handsome, and awesome independent creator such as myself, I encourage you highly to go follow the link in the description and support the official release. Thank you so much for listening, and let's jump right back into that story. The heart of the storm had passed us up, and that's why gravity was doing its worst to the dust. My hammer clawed at any tables. We needed planks to use for the window coverings. One table was already shredded down to the planks, and I took it first to the window. It was time to get back to work. A dusty wind soared in from the window, aiming to clog my eyes. A framed baby photo done clocked me right in the forehead. My focus persisted. The board was placed up and the nails smacked in. There weren't many nails to go around. It was time for the next plank and so on. The first window had been covered despite being pelted by strangers' personal belongings. Only 7 more to go, and that count was ignoring the doorways. This place was not Dustnado safe. I attempted to look out into the city, but the dust cloud was thicker than any human vision could pierce. The heart of the city was blackened by this cloud. Esther guided TM and Donald down the stairs. Esther had given his bandana to TM, who wore it with pride. My bag housed plenty of stairs. We'll have to get after that soon. Donald came down to us using his hand for cover, and a strange wind flung the rear exit's destruction into the bottom of the stairs. The stairs gave way. Esther's back was the first to hit the floor. He crashed into the rubble, swooped in from the exit. Esther had been holding TM's hand and tugged him down along with him. TM's fall was mostly broken by Esther's own body. Donald fell into a separate part of the pile. I rushed over to their aid, fighting against the contradictory air currents. My eyes gazed upon the scene at the bottom of the former stairs, looking to assist. TM was in a panic and he lay on top of Esther's unconscious body. I grabbed an armful of TM and pulled him off of Esther and out of the shattered wood and planted his feet on the ground. Donald dug himself free of the rubble by the time I'd made it over to him. His face displayed disbelief. If Donald was so taken back by the effects of Dustnado, he must not be a Stone-Tooth native. He probably just got registered there because it was easy. "We need to barricade any openings in this building," I commanded. "Donald, try and wake Esther, then start breaking down those tables and bringing me the planks. TM, you're on nail duty. Bring me every nail you find." Donald and TM struggled against the wind currents to get anything done. Until the storm passed or we got these boards up, they were going to have to learn to ride the wind currents. By now, the dust piled like snow on the ground. We packed through it and left tracks. We had to close off these entries before the dust closed off our lungs, if they hadn't already been taken in by the black suffocator. "You have to ride the wind," I instructed my struggling partners. "Figure out which direction the wind is blowing and go with it rather than against it." After a few attempts, TM seemed to catch on. That was normal for kids. That's why Stone-Tooth engraved it in our brains as blossoming kindergartners. Once logic ruled our thoughts, such readjustments became a major bear, and Donald's struggles paid homage to that. I worked through the planks I'd acquired from the first table I'd broken down while Donald tended to Esther. Esther was moving, which was a good sign, but he was moving real slow. I could tell that fall had knocked him silly. Silly or not, we needed all hands on deck. These openings needed sealing, and the second window was barricaded with only 1 plank to spare, and all before any of my partners reached any level of job completion. "Where are we at with them nails?" I called out to TM. He raced back with a banquet of 3 nails. "3's a decent start." I consulted his concerned expression, "but we'll need more. See if you can get any nails out of these tables we're breaking down." I encouraged him along while watching Donald and Esther struggle. "Look at you guys. I realize it's faster with a hammer, but there's 2 of you against 1 table. Use some aggression. We're taking in gallons of dust." I pushed Donald and Esther, and they didn't appreciate it, but they needed it. I left them and returned to the room behind the bar. K2 was still out. It wasn't time to wake him just yet, but we definitely needed to keep an eye on him. I returned to the bar and snagged one of Donald's table planks. It was tacked over a new window using all my precious nails. At this point, I snagged the table and began to dismember it. I was right. It was much easier with a hammer. My entire table was demolished while Donald and Esther continued to struggle with the first. "Do you have another hammer somewhere?" I asked, while I started nailing in the board. Esther responded with a shrug. "This is serious," I rushed back. "The more dust that blows in here, the greater our chances of excessive inhalation. Excessive inhalation leads to death," I asserted. "It's what killed Mom and Daddy. So, when I ask a question, a shrug is no longer an acceptable response." "Take charge," Daddy's carver encouraged. They all watched me as if I'd grown wings and started spitting fire. Maybe I was spitting a different kind of fire, but the wings were still missing. Esther took the hint, broke away from the table, and went to the room behind the bar. Donald kept at the table, avoiding eye contact. My glance changed to TM. We met eyes and his hands shuffled to bang nails out of the loose boards. Esther rushed back with 2 more hammers. Now we're getting somewhere. It took a couple of fussy hours, but I finally got the first floor barricaded and the openings mostly covered by loosely nailed boards. The dust on the floor was shin high and I didn't like that. I'd never been this deep in dust before. As far as I was concerned, we were all going to die from excessive inhalation, but I couldn't get all hung up on that. Esther followed me into the back room, and we retrieved K2, who was as out as the loser of a boxing match. We hauled him into the bar. "Donald," I called out, "clear the bar." Donald high-kneed through the dust and over to the bar. He wiped it clean of the thick inches of caked-up dust. Dust-filled shot glasses puffed into the dust-filled floor. Esther and I laid K2 on the bar. Tim grabbed around my calf while he studied K2. "He's fine, little Tim. He's just sleeping," I assured him with a quick glance. "Esther, get us a glass of water." "My specialty," Esther bragged. "1 glass of water coming up." Esther turned to the faucet. It took a minute before the water came, but we still had water, which was crucial. "All right, Esther, give me a face full," I ordered. Esther splashed water into K2's face. That got him stirring. It was a good sign. If he'd been in deeper, I doubt a splash of water would have helped him kick it. K2 tried to sit up, but bonked his head on the bar ceiling. He lay back down on the bar, rubbing his head. The water might not have done it, but the new knot on his head sure had. "Can you hear me, K2?" I asked. "Yeah," he responded in a quivering voice. "Can you breathe okay?" I asked. "Yeah, I think so," he responded, his head still in the clouds. "Esther, keep the water coming," I ordered. "He needs to wash his lungs out." Esther was on it. He cleaned each dust-ridden glass, filled it with water, and then tossed it on the bar. I helped K2 off the bar and then helped him stand. After I saw that he had his balance, I sat him at the bar. "K2, keep drinking. We need to wash you out," I instructed. My butt demanded a seat, if only for a moment, just long enough to soak in all I'd just done. My face bled from every angle, and I felt as though I'd been trampled. In fact, my whole body was in a rough state. My spine felt as though it had wrapped the knot in itself, my legs as shaky as Esther's drink specials, and my arms too worn to lift. But the most dreadful realization came from the fact that my adrenaline was clearly numbing the true pain. If I felt this trash as an adrenaline junkie, then I truly dreaded my next waking hour. The bar aged by 200 years between wind damage and dust buildup. Everything was packed with a layer of black. The structural devastation was beyond help. The wild winds had blown around anything that wasn't fixed to the position. There were personal artifacts blown onto the floor from other people's dwellings. I'd reckon no shanty survived this Dustnado. Hillville didn't build their shanties to be Dustnado ready. Not that there was a such thing, but Hillville didn't so much as make an attempt. I could still hear Dustnado raging on. It had passed through but still blew dust our way. I kind of fancy how years of unused stone tooth training can just appear in my brain all at once when I need it. Our dust drills had been a reality to me. I was going to grow up and be a dustbuster. 7 years old is too young to murder a dream. But that's what happened. Stone Tooth's economy tanked after its 7th consecutive Dustnado that year, and everything was shut down. No more school, no more establishment, no more dustbuster programs. Stone Tooth was reduced to nothing more than just a spruced up patch of wasteland at that point. We lost Mom 3 years after. She'd inhaled too much dust getting Kyle and me down to the cellar. We were one of the 3 shanties in town that had a cellar. Daddy built it himself, claiming that his family would be safe from any Dustnado. But I suppose that Dustnado didn't fall into the realm of any Dustnado. Daddy was wrapped up at work for that rager. The memories of his return home days later was pure horror. Coming back to a home buried in dust was one thing, but having to dig your wife's corpse out from the excessive black pile was a punishment too cruel for the devil himself. And such a punishment for what? Being the best father this sort of life allowed? It was too different without Mom. 3 years later, I was 13 and Kyle 11, another Dustnado hit. They were quite routine for us at that point. We were old enough to navigate to the cellar ourselves that time. We had no other choice. Daddy had been caught up at work for this one too, and Mom had been gone. Kyle and I waited in the cellar for days. Our provisions were running scarce and we had to leave. We were always told to wait until Daddy came to get us, except this time Daddy never came home. Kyle and I left shortly after receiving the news. One of Daddy's colleagues came by to share the impending misery. We didn't cry. It's not what Daddy would have wanted. We kept our upper lips stiff and committed wastelanding. Daddy always spoke to wastelanding in such wonderment. I always imagined if he didn't have a family to look after, he'd be out here wastelanding too. So we tested his dreams, hoping to do him proud. I never questioned whether Daddy's demise was a willing sacrifice. I accepted it and pressed forward. It was baffling to imagine it had been 4 years since my last Dustnado, something that in a life before wastelanding I'd experienced 4 times in a single year at the very least. Given the lack of Dustnados, Kyle and I always felt that wastelanding was such a better life. Wandering from town to town, seeing the world, working to eat, and living a simple life. That was our summary of wastelanding. And up to about a week ago, it was damn good living. "Damn Dustnados," Esther jittered. "I left Stone Tooth to get away from that hell. What the hell is this? Dustnados?" he said in a panic. "Esther," I tried to stop his pacing with a hand gesture. "No one likes Dustnados, but you really don't like them. Is there something you need to talk about?" I asked. "Is there something I'd like to talk about?" Esther mocked. "That's kind of funny coming from you, the guy who's been a shell of himself these past 2 weeks, and then what? We get hit by a Dustnado and boom, you're some sort of dustbuster?" "Yeah, basically," I acknowledged. "Dustnados were something I dealt with well before all this shit. Experiencing them now brought me back to who I was before wastelanding, who I was back in Stone Tooth. I reckon it's had the same effect on you, Esther. Who were you before Hillville?" "I was a kindergarten teacher," Esther responded, taking a seat, conceding to his emotions. I studied his face real hard. My memory was trying to place it. "Mr. Williams?" I asked. He nodded. "Holy shit, no way." "That's me," he confirmed. "Esther Williams." "You were my kindergarten teacher," I announced. "Kyle's too," I remembered. "Yes, and yes," he confirmed again. "I've seen you so many times and never even recognized you in the slightest." I had to think on that one. "Yeah," Esther sulked. "It's been a couple of years and we've both changed quite a bit. You would have been there when that Dustnado hit the school." I could see it in his face. I'd found the thing he'd been hiding from. "You disappeared immediately thereafter. Why? No one ever blamed you for what happened." No one except me, that is, Esther lashed back. I had nothing to say to that. I couldn't make Mr. Williams forgive himself. That's something he had to do. But it was upsetting to hear how that had affected him. It was hard to fathom how Dustnado seemed to bring out the worst in everyone except for me. This Dustnado brought me to the best vision of myself. Was it because of my dust-busting determination, the return to my past, or probably some combination of both, with a sprinkle of wasteland experience as well? The storm isn't so close anymore, I announced, standing from my seat. I'm going to go out there and see what's going on. You guys should rest up in here and look after K2. If he develops a cough, send him to a medical center, if there's one still standing. With those words, I took my leave from the bar. The bars boarded up front steered me out the back, although the back exit had doubled in size after having been blown open. My feet still navigated it with care. It had become cluttered by planks, furniture, and of course, dust, all brought in by the storm from the other destroyed residents. Sounds of commotion filled the air once I made it outside. Panting, coughing, stamping, screaming, crying, it all filled the air. The human song of a Dustnado is what I called it back home. Another miserable sound brought back to familiarity from my past. I could still hear the Dustnado. It was probably just up the street. The black sky was a mystery. I couldn't decipher whether it was still night or whether the sky had just been painted black by all the dust. I'd seen both happen. I turned the corner of the bar and came to sight of a mixed glory. There at the other side of town stood a mass of air that was the Dustnado. I hadn't seen one this full in years. It was just an unpredictable gathering of dust. I couldn't discern whether Dustnado was coming or going. They generally only travel in a single direction, but the one that hit the school turned back around and hit it again, making sure to finish what it started. Mr. Williams had followed the evacuation plan after Dustnado's departure, but with the Dustnado's turnaround, he'd actually led his class right into its wrath. The residual winds barely blew on this side of town, but the heart of the storm had made it into the opposite side of town. It raged right in the middle of McDougal's manor. Never before had my mind experienced this level of joy and nerves combined into one. Richard McDougal was getting his, all right, but I couldn't ensure Kyle's safety in this storm. Or could I? I had to double check as I wasn't sure what I was doing, but I was doing it. My thoughts had silenced and my legs were moving. They were marching into the heart of the Dustnado to rescue my brother. It was stupid, brave, or both together, but I was finally able to face a Dustnado, just like a true dustbuster. I might not have been Stone Tooth official, but on that day, I was a dustbuster. The wind whipped harder the closer I got, but I was still a great distance from the rager. The sheer power of this force of nature stole my breath, a sensation not easily overlooked. Even with my abundant Dustnado dealings, I still had to stand in awe of the storm's destructive beauty. Like a swirly wind tunnel of dust throwing chaos everywhere. I sniffed out charred wood in the air. The closer I got to the mass of dust in the air, the more I noticed the prominent glow within its disaster. Fire. Wood stoves were a nice luxury until the dust came. Mr. McDougal was learning the pointlessness of material possessions, something I'd known since my stay in the womb. It was a shame for such craftsmanship to be burned down and blown to asunder, but given the owner, it felt just in its own way. I approached the rager with a brave step. As I passed through town, men and women stood outside their rubble-reduced shanties. Some mourned, some wept for the destruction of property, and others soaked in the Dustnado in all its vicious glory. My stride was met by another brave soul. "McDougal's manor is on fire!" she exclaimed. "I bet if we help out, he'll give us a hefty reward!" "Oh," I pretended to realize. "Yeah, I'll help out." For my own personal reasons. End of chapter 12.